An old Mamod traction engine rebuild. This one is part 3, looking at the old components and breaking them apart. The part that you're looking at is the worst part of the engine, and I'm going to need some tools to dismantle it. The first one being a hammer, the second an electric drill, the third a sharp chisel, and the fourth a Stanley knife. What do I need a Stanley knife for? Well, a package arrived in the post this morning and I need this to open it. It's very well wrapped, I must say, and this was also in like a plastic bag. Once again, it's like playing pass the parcel, and I get a prize every time. With the help of the Stanley knife, I unwrapped the first layer and then I found another layer of brown paper. So now, oh, what's this? Interesting. Underneath the 2 layers of brown paper is a box, a wooden box. Which reminds me of a story from a lot of years back when my daughters were very small. One year I was searching through the attic for something and I found a wooden box, and I realised that this was a leftover Christmas present from the year before. And you know, it was a real pity because both of my young daughters would have really loved a kitten the Christmas before. That's not actually true, it's just my warped sense of humour. So now I need a Stanley knife and a chisel for this job. The wooden box is really well made, really well made. When I open the box I find this piece of paper with a load of numbers on it. So I think by now you've probably guessed what's in the package, and lots of them. These are really good quality milling cutters. And look at this one, I've never seen a milling cutter like this before. It's got a cutter on both ends. This is definitely my kind of milling cutter. If you break it, you just turn it around in the milling machine and you can carry on, without having to waste time ferreting through a load of boxes of milling cutters. And it doesn't stop there. Apart from these milling cutters, and particularly this very large long one which is extremely useful, in the box are a set of lathe tools. The red ones are carbide tip tools, and I like using this type of tool because you can sharpen them very quickly using a green grit grinding wheel. Also included were a couple of pieces of high-speed steel, great for grinding up to make form tools. And they are very conveniently exactly the right size to fit my quick change tool post. So where did this very early Christmas present come from? Well, it came all the way from Texas, from a man called Michael. And I'd like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank Michael for sending these parts. They will be incredibly useful to me. Thank you, Michael. Time to put this tooling in a safe place so I can begin the total destruction phase of what's left of the Mamod. I'm going to need this very small blowtorch to unsolder the steam pipe from the boiler. As I've mentioned before, I used to have a very old TE1 in the 1960s, and I let it boil dry once, which melted the solder and it started leaking from this point. So I took it back to the local model shop from whence it came, because the man in the shop used to repair models and toys. But unfortunately, when I got it back, it had the worst possible solder job on this steam pipe that I've ever seen. The thought of it makes me shudder to this day. He must have used a really large soldering iron, and the solder joint was massive and very ugly indeed. Quite unlike a girlfriend I used to have. Anyway, this hideous solder connection really put me off. I don't mean girlfriends, I mean the traction engine. So I didn't use it much after that. Back to the destruction of this one. First thing to do is to drill out the rivets. Initially I used a 3/16 drill, but I found it was a bit big. This is a smaller one and goes all the way through. I was very surprised at the design of the boiler. There's a cavity in here. I think I know what it's for. I guess it's to trap the condensate from the steam pipes that go into the chimney. But I would have thought that the smoke box was big enough to do that. Or at the time of design and manufacture, was it just to make the boiler hold less water? I'm not sure about this. In slow motion, I'm removing the rivets that hold the bracket to the firebox. And now the bracket that holds the flywheel and the piston and the cylinder assembly is ready to be removed. But before I can do that, I need to unsolder it from the boiler. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to use this very small blowtorch. While I'm waiting for the joint to heat up and the solder to melt, all I can see in my head is the hideous joint that the man in the model shop made on my traction engine when I was a child. 60 years later, I was fighting the urge to phone Childline and get some counselling on it, when the solder melted and the whole assembly became freestanding. Let's have a close look at this bracket. It is really badly bent. I don't know how this thing managed to work in the first place. This part's bent too. Now's the time, I think, to drill out the rest of the rivets and totally disassemble the unit. Most of these pop rivets are aluminium apart from the two that go through into the boiler and secure the boiler to the main frame that holds the firebox plate. What can I say about Mamod traction engines? Well, not much really. They are very unmechanical from an assembly point of view and a manufacture point of view, but they work and give a lot of pleasure to children and, dare I say it, adults as well. The copper rivets were more difficult to drill out. I had to revert to the chisel. This part of the boiler was very badly damaged because as I pulled out the whistle, which really didn't want to come out, I actually pulled out the metal barrel of the boiler with it. I saw a video on YouTube about how they make these boilers. It was very interesting, and the whole thing is pressed out of a piece of sheet brass. And this process really hardens the brass, as you can hear from the hammer blows. After a while, once I hammered the boiler into submission, I could remove it from the frame. Time to have a closer look. This is the alloy smoke box. The two holes in the chimney are for the exhaust steam pipes and the steam condensers in the smoke box, and I assume some of it runs through the hole into the cavity in the front of the boiler. I was curious to see how much limescale had accumulated in this Mamod over the years, so it was over to the bandsaw to saw the boiler in half. And here I can state for a second time, even though this is a brass boiler, it's fairly strong. The manufacturing process obviously toughens up the brass. And this is what I found inside the boiler. Really strange. All the limescale is at the top of the boiler, and there's hardly any at the bottom. I would have thought it would be the other way around. I wonder if I'm correct in my assumption that limescale forms when there's a mixture of air and water. I assume that this small boiler must have been partially full of water all of the time. Maybe not, I don't really know. Well, the boiler is scrap and the firebox is scrap. It's just not worth keeping. For some reason though, I'm going to keep these parts. I don't know why. Maybe I could make the shortest Mamod traction engine in the world. And that's about it for this episode. I'd just like to say the usual: stay safe, stay well. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.